He wrote it the night before takeoff. The paper smelled of fuel. His words were calm, but every sentence felt like a farewell. March 18, 1944. East Anglia, England. 2nd Lieutenant James Jimmy Sullivan of the 389th Bombardment Group sat in the dim light of a kerosene lamp, his pen scratching against rough military stationery. Outside, B-24 Liberators lined the runway like sleeping giants, their aluminum skin wet with English rain. In 6 hours, he would climb into one of those planes for the last time. But tonight, in this moment, he was just a 22-year-old boy from Ohio trying to find words that wouldn't make his mother cry. The barracks were cold, that penetrating English dampness that no amount of coal in the pot-bellied stove could defeat. Jimmy pulled his leather flight jacket tighter around his shoulders, the sheepskin collar still smelling of the high-altitude missions where temperatures dropped to 40 below. Around him, 9 other men tried to sleep or pretended to try. Tomorrow they would fly together in a metal tube named Ohio Dreams, 30,000 feet above the earth, into a sky full of fighters and flak and death dressed in black smoke. The letter began simply, the way all his letters began, as if nothing had changed, as if tomorrow would be just another milk run over occupied France. But something was different this time. You could feel it in the weight of each word, the careful way he chose what to say and what to leave unsaid. "Dear Mom and Pop," Jimmy wrote, his handwriting steady despite the tremor in his hand. "It's raining again here. That soft English rain that never seems to stop. Makes me think of home, of those April showers you always said brought May flowers. Funny how rain sounds different here. Not better or worse, just different. Like everything else in this place. It falls on the metal roofs of our Quonset huts like 1,000 fingers tapping. Like it's trying to tell us something in Morse code that we can't quite understand." He paused, dipping his pen in the inkwell, watching the black liquid cling to the nib. How many letters had he written from this same spot? How many times had he searched for words that would comfort without lying, that would prepare without alarming, that would say goodbye without saying goodbye? "I got your package yesterday," he continued. "The socks are perfect warm and dry, which is more than I can say for anything else around here. Tell Mrs. Henderson thank you for the cookies. We shared them around, and for a minute it was like being back at your kitchen table arguing with Bobby about who got the last one. Martinez, our tail gunner, he'd never had snickerdoodles before. Can you believe that? A man who can shoot down a Messerschmitt at 300 yards had never tasted a snickerdoodle. He says when this is over, he's coming to Ohio just to learn your recipe. I told him you'd teach his wife, and maybe their kids would grow up arguing over the last cookie too, the way Bobby and I did." "How is Bobby?" Jimmy wrote. "Still talking about joining up when he turns 18? Tell him to wait. Tell him to wait as long as he can. Tell him the war will still be here if he's needed, but once you're in it, once you've seen what I've seen, you can never go back to who you were before. I know he thinks I'm a hero flying these big planes, fighting the good fight. But heroes are just regular people who ran out of choices, Mom. Heroes are boys who miss their mothers and dream about fishing in Buckeye Lake and wake up screaming from nightmares they can't remember in the morning. Don't let history be forgotten. These words, these last testimonies, they matter more than any official report, any sanitized history. They are the truth of war, written by those who lived it, who died in it, who never came home from it. We're flying again tomorrow," Jimmy wrote, choosing his words carefully. "Can't say where, of course, but it's important. Colonel says it could shorten the war by months. Maybe he's right. Maybe tomorrow we'll drop our bombs and turn the tide and all come home heroes. That's what we tell ourselves, anyway. That's what gets us up the ladder and into our positions when every instinct screams to run the other way. We've been losing planes, Mom. I won't lie to you. Yesterday, Heaven Can Wait didn't come back. That's 40 missions Captain Henderson had flown, 40 times he'd beaten the odds, and then suddenly he didn't. His crew was supposed to go home next week. They had a party planned and everything. Outside, he could hear Sergeant Martinez, his tail gunner, playing a harmonica. "I'll be seeing you," slow and mournful. Martinez had a wife and 2 kids in El Paso. He carried their picture in a pocket over his heart. said it had stopped a piece of shrapnel once, though everyone knew that was impossible. But they let him believe it, let him have that small magic in a world that had run out of miracles. Martinez had been flying for 14 months, longer than almost anyone. He had that look now, that 1,000-yard stare that came from seeing too many friends not come back, from counting the empty bunks, from knowing that luck was a finite resource and his was running low. "I want to tell you something," Jimmy continued, his pen moving faster now, as if time was running out. "I want to tell you that I'm fine, that I'm not scared, that I'm the brave airman you see in the recruitment posters. But I can't lie to you. Not tonight. Not when I can feel something shifting in the air, like the pressure change before a storm. I'm scared, Mom. Not all the time. There's no time for that when you're flying, when you're focused on keeping formation and watching for fighters. But now, in the quiet moments, when I can hear my own heartbeat, I'm terrified. I'm terrified that I'll never see home again, that I'll never sit at your kitchen table, that I'll never teach Bobby how to throw a proper curveball." The admission sat on the page like a confession. Jimmy had never written those words before, had never admitted his fear to anyone, not even to himself. But tonight felt different. Tonight felt final. Tonight, the usual superstitions and rituals that kept them going seemed hollow. Peterson hadn't worn his lucky scarf. Williams had forgotten to kiss the picture of his girl. Small things, but in a world where death came at random, small things were all they had to hold on to. "Do you remember when I was 8 and fell out of the oak tree in the backyard?" Jimmy wrote. "I was so high up, higher than I should have been, trying to prove something to the older boys. When I fell, time seemed to slow down. I could see every branch I passed, every leaf. Could see you running from the house, your apron still on, flour in your hair from making bread. That's what it's like up there, Mom. Time moves differently at 20,000 feet. You can see forever and nowhere at the same time. You're closer to heaven but surrounded by hell. Yesterday, I watched a fortress explode right next to us. 1 second it was there, 10 men inside, and the next it was just fire and aluminum confetti. No parachutes, no time. Just there and then gone. Like God had erased them from the sky. "Briefing at 0400 Sullivan," Morris said quietly. "Get some sleep if you can." "Yes, sir. Just finishing a letter home." Morris nodded, understanding. They all wrote letters before big missions. Some mailed them, some didn't. Some were found later, tucked into footlockers or flight jackets. Last words that arrived after the telegrams, like voices from beyond the grave. Morris himself had 3 letters in his footlocker, each one dated, each one saying goodbye without saying goodbye, waiting to be mailed if he didn't come back. "Sullivan," Morris said, then paused. "Tomorrow's going to be rough. Friedrichshafen. Deep penetration, heavy defenses. If you want to stand down, no one would blame you. You've flown 22 missions. That's more than most. We finished together, Captain. All of us or none of us." Morris smiled sadly. "That's what Henderson said yesterday." "I want you to know something," Jimmy wrote. "If something happens to me, and I'm not saying it will, but if it does, I want you to know that I don't regret coming here. I don't regret volunteering. I see what we're fighting against. I've seen the photos from the reconnaissance flights, the camps, the cities reduced to rubble. I've seen what happens when evil goes unchecked. We bombed a factory last week, and on the way back, we flew over a concentration camp. We were low, maybe 5,000 feet, and I could see people in striped uniforms, could see how thin they were, could see them looking up at us. One of them waved. Can you imagine? In that hell, someone still had the strength to wave at American planes. And I knew then that this is worth it. It has to be worth it. He was running out of paper now, running out of time. Outside, the first hints of dawn were creeping across the horizon, though it was still hours before sunrise. Time moved strangely before missions, compressed and stretched simultaneously. Minutes felt like hours, hours like seconds. The waiting was almost worse than the flying. "I keep thinking about that last Sunday dinner before I shipped out," he continued, his handwriting getting smaller, trying to fit everything onto the remaining space. The pot roast, the green beans from the garden, Bobby stealing rolls when he thought no one was looking. Pop's prayer before the meal. How his voice caught when he asked for protection for those in harm's way. I carry that dinner with me, Mom. I carry all our dinners, all our mornings, all our regular, ordinary, beautiful life. It's what I think about when the flak is thick and the fighters are coming in. Not glory or country or victory. Just home. Just you. Just the way the sunlight came through the kitchen window and made everything golden. Pop, I need you to know something too. Jimmy wrote in the margin, his writing cramped and urgent. That time you taught me to drive and I scraped the side of the Ford on the gatepost and you just laughed and said, now it has character. I think about that when our plane comes back full of holes. Now it has character, I tell myself. That's all. And remember when we went fishing that last time and didn't catch anything, and you said that wasn't the point? I understand now. It never was about the fish. Support this work so the truth continues to reach people. These aren't just historical documents. They're the last words of boys who became men too quickly, who paid prices that can never be calculated, who wrote their hearts onto paper because they knew their time was running short. I need to tell you something else, he wrote, turning the paper sideways to use every inch of space. I'm not sure I'll return from tomorrow's mission. I can't explain why I feel this way, call it intuition, call it the law of averages catching up. 23 missions is already more than most make. But I need you to know that if I don't come back, I was thinking of you. I was thinking of home. I was thinking of Sunday dinners and summer evenings and all the life I wanted to live. But most of all, I want you to remember me alive. Not as a casualty, not as a statistic, not as a name on a memorial. Remember me laughing at Pop's jokes. Remember me teaching Bobby to throw a curveball. Remember me alive and young and full of dreams, even if those dreams ended at 20,000 feet over Germany. There's a girl here in the village, Jimmy added, finding one last blank space. Her name is Margaret. She serves tea at the Red Cross canteen. She has your kindness, Mom, the way she remembers everyone's name, asks about their families. I was going to ask her to a dance next week. Had it all planned out what I'd say, how I'd say it. Funny how we make plans even when we know tomorrow isn't guaranteed. Maybe especially then. Maybe planning for a future is how we convince ourselves we'll have one. He could hear footsteps outside now, multiple sets. The sound of men heading to the mess hall for the pre-mission breakfast. Real eggs today, not powdered. Bacon. Coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in. The traditional last meal, though no one called it that. They called it fuel, called it necessary, called it anything but what it was, a goodbye dressed up as breakfast. Jimmy signed the letter the way he always did. Your loving son, Jimmy. But then he added something, a postscript that would haunt his mother for the rest of her life. P.S. If you're reading this and I haven't come home, know that I wasn't alone up there. We were 10 brothers in Ohio dreams, and we took care of each other until the end. Whatever happened, we faced it together. Tell Bobby that's what courage really is. Not being fearless, but being afraid together and going anyway. Tell him that when he's old enough to understand. Tell him his brother loved him more than all the stars we flew through. He folded the letter carefully, placed it in an envelope, and addressed it with the practiced precision of someone who had written home every week for 2 years. Then he placed it in his breast pocket, over his heart, where Martinez kept the photo of his family. He'd mail it after the mission, or someone else would mail it for him. Either way, it would find its way home. The chaplain said a prayer, the same prayer he always said, about protection and courage and duty. But Jimmy noticed his hands were shaking, noticed the way his voice caught on amen. Noticed that he didn't look anyone in the eye. Even God's representative was running out of faith. Jimmy took his position in Ohio Dreams at 0530. The ball turret where he served as gunner was a plexiglass bubble hanging from the belly of the plane, the loneliest and most vulnerable position on the aircraft. Once they were airborne and he was lowered into position, he would be suspended in space, surrounded by nothing but thin plastic and .50 caliber machine guns, rotating 360 degrees, watching for fighters that could come from any direction. The ball turret gunner, someone had written, was the closest thing to being born again, curled in a fetal position in a plastic womb, waiting to be delivered into violence. The engines coughed to life one by one, for massive Pratt and Whitney radials that shook the entire airframe. Jimmy could feel the vibration in his bones, could taste the aviation fuel and oil that permeated everything. Around them, dozens of other bombers were starting up, the sound building to a roar that drowned out thought, that drowned out fear, that drowned out everything except the mission. This was always the moment when it became real, when the abstract idea of a mission became the concrete reality of engines and ammunition and the possibility of not coming back. At 0600, they began to roll. Ohio Dreams was fifth in the takeoff sequence, behind Lucky Lady, and ahead of Heaven Can Wait. The takeoff was always the first test of faith. Tons of aluminum and fuel and bombs struggling to break free from gravity, engines straining, the runway disappearing beneath them foot by foot until suddenly, miraculously, they were airborne. Jimmy watched through the small window as the English countryside fell away, as they climbed through the morning clouds into brilliant sunshine. Below, England disappeared, replaced by the cold gray of the Channel. Somewhere down there, in those gray waters, were the wrecks of planes that hadn't made it back, crews entombed in aluminum coffins, forever trying to reach home. The formation assembled slowly, bombers rising from airfields across East Anglia, converging into a stream of aluminum and determination. 300 bombers and 200 fighters, one of the largest raids of the war so far. From his position, Jimmy could see them stretching to the horizon, each plane filled with 10 men, each man carrying his own fears, his own letters home, his own premonitions. It was beautiful in a terrible way, this parade of democracy's arsenal, this flying testament to industrial might and human will. They crossed the French coast at 0800. Immediately, the flak started black puffs of smoke that looked harmless from a distance but could tear through aluminum like paper. Each puff represented tons of steel fragments exploding outward, searching for something to destroy. The Germans were getting better at it, using radar to predict altitude and heading, boxing them in with curtains of fire. Jimmy swung his turret, scanning for fighters. They would come soon, he knew. They always did. The first fighters appeared at 0845, Messerschmitt 109s climbing from the south, their yellow noses bright in the morning sun. They attacked in pairs, rolling through the formation with guns blazing, then diving away before the gunners could track them. Jimmy's guns hammered back, the spent shells falling into the collection bag, the heat from the barrels fogging his plexiglass dome. He could feel the plane shudder as other gunners opened fire. 10 men working as one organism, a flying porcupine of death. Fighter, 2 o'clock high. Captain Morris's voice crackled through the intercom. Jimmy swung his turret, found the target, a Focke-Wulf 190 diving straight at them, wings lit up with cannon fire. He pressed the triggers, felt the satisfying hammer of the 50s, watched his tracers reach out toward the fighter. The German rolled away at the last second, so close Jimmy could see the pilot's face, could see him looking back, one warrior acknowledging another in the democracy of combat where everyone was equal and equally mortal. They flew deeper into Germany, the flak growing thicker, more accurate. Jimmy could hear shrapnel hitting the fuselage, could see holes appearing in the wings. The plane next to them, Lucky Lady, took a direct hit and fell out of formation, spinning down with 2 engines on fire. Jimmy watched for parachutes, counted 3, maybe 4. 6 men who wouldn't see another sunrise. 6 letters that would never be mailed. Tail gunner to pilot. Martinez's voice came through the intercom. We're losing hydraulic fluid. Looks like the lines are hit. Can we make it to the target? Morris asked. We can make it there, Captain. Not sure about back. Then we go on. This was the equation of war, Jimmy thought. How much damage could you take and keep flying? How many holes could you put in a dream before it couldn't stay airborne? They were all damaged now, all carrying wounds visible and invisible, all held together by nothing more than rivets and determination and the promise that somehow, somewhere, this would all mean something. At 1,000 hours, they reached the initial point and began the bomb run. This was the worst part, flying straight and level for 7 minutes while the bombardier lined up the target, unable to take evasive action, sitting ducks for the flak batteries below. Jimmy could see the target ahead, the industrial complex sprawling along a river, smoke already rising from the first group's bombs. The flak was a solid wall now, so thick you could walk on it, as the crew said. Ohio Dreams bucked and shuddered as shrapnel tore through her skin. Bombardier to crew, 30 seconds to release. Those 30 seconds lasted forever. Jimmy could hear someone praying over the intercom, could smell smoke, could feel the plane starting to vibrate in a way that wasn't right. Something vital had been hit. Something that mattered. Bombs away. The plane lurched upward as 10,000 pounds of high explosives fell toward the target. Morris immediately banked hard left, diving to gain speed, trying to get out of the flak field. But it was too late. The first fighter came from directly below, where Jimmy couldn't reach with his guns. Cannon shells ripped through the fuselage, and suddenly the intercom went dead. The plane shuddered, rolled, began to fall. Jimmy tried to get out of his turret, but the mechanism was jammed. He was trapped in his plexiglass bubble as Ohio Dreams began her final dive. Through the scratched plexiglass, he could see the ground spinning closer, could see other planes falling around them, could see fighters still attacking even as they fell. He thought of the letter in his pocket, pressed against his heart. His words to home that would now never be mailed. He thought of his mother reading the telegram, of Bobby trying to be strong, of his father standing in the doorway looking at his empty chair. "I'm not sure I'll return," he had written, "but remember me alive." In those last seconds, as the ground rushed up to meet him, Jimmy wasn't thinking about glory or country or cause. He was thinking about Sunday dinners and summer evenings and the girl named Margaret he would never dance with. He was thinking about teaching Bobby to throw a curveball and helping his father fix the Ford and watching his mother make bread on Saturday mornings. He was remembering himself alive, even as life left him. Ohio Dreams hit the ground at 1,047 hours, 6 kilometers southwest of Friedrichshafen. The explosion could be seen for miles, a pillar of fire and smoke rising into the German sky. There were no survivors. 10 men from 10 different states, united in death as they had been in life. The letter in Jimmy's pocket was destroyed, those last words home becoming ash and memory. Subscribe so these forbidden stories don't vanish again. These letters, these last words, these fragments of humanity in the machinery of war, they are why we remember, why we must remember, why we can never afford to forget. But this isn't where the story ends. Because 3 days before that final mission, Jimmy had given a copy of his letter to the chaplain, just in case. "If something happens," he'd said, "make sure this gets home." The chaplain had taken the letter, had added it to the stack of others he carried. Last words from boys who suspected their number was up. The telegram to Jimmy's parents arrived 2 weeks later. "We regret to inform you that 2nd Lieutenant James Sullivan was killed in action over Germany on March 19, 1944. He served his country with distinction and honor." Sterile words that said nothing about who Jimmy really was, about his fear and courage, about his love for home that sustained him through 23 missions into hell. But then, 3 days after the telegram, Jimmy's letter arrived. The chaplain had kept his promise. Jimmy's mother would read it every day for the rest of her life, would memorize every word, every crossed-out phrase, every spot where his pen had paused. She would especially remember the line that became both prophecy and plea. "I'm not sure I'll return, but remember me alive." She did remember him alive, in the way she set his place at the table every Sunday for a year after the telegram came, in the way she kept his room exactly as he'd left it, his model planes still hanging from the ceiling, his baseball glove still on the dresser, in the way she taught Margaret, the girl from the village who wrote to her after the war, how to make snickerdoodles. The two women bound together by love for a boy who never came home. Bobby did join up, despite Jimmy's warnings, but the war ended before he shipped out. He became a teacher instead, and every year on March 19th, he would tell his students about his brother, about Ohio Dreams, about 10 men who flew into history and never flew out. He would read them parts of Jimmy's letter, the parts about courage and fear and flying together, and his students would understand that heroes weren't different from them, weren't braver or stronger, just ordinary people who did extraordinary things because they had to. Years later, a German farmer plowing his field would uncover pieces of Ohio Dreams. Serial numbers, a belt buckle, a corroded dog tag. The German government would contact the American authorities, and eventually the crew would be identified and brought home. Jimmy Sullivan would be buried in Arlington National Cemetery with full military honors. His mother still alive to see it, 93 years old and still carrying his letter in her purse. At the burial, she met the other families, the mothers and sisters and brothers of the men who had died with Jimmy. They all had letters too, last words from their boys, all saying essentially the same thing in different ways. Remember us. Remember us not as we died but as we lived. Remember us at kitchen tables and in backyards and on summer evenings when the world was whole and we were young and alive and full of impossible dreams. The Air Force Museum would eventually acquire Jimmy's letter, along with hundreds of others like it. They would create an exhibit called Last Words Home, where visitors could read the final letters of airmen who never returned. But the letters were almost too powerful, too raw. People would stand in front of them crying, unable to move on to the next display. The curator would have to post tissues and benches, places for people to sit and compose themselves after reading words that were never meant for strangers' eyes. The museum would also acquire something else, a recording made by one of the ground crew members at Jimmy's base. He had used a wire recorder to capture the sounds of a mission morning, the engines starting, the planes taking off, the gradual fade of sound as they headed east toward Germany. At the end of the recording, you can hear him say, "There goes Ohio dreams. Come back safe, boys." But they didn't come back safe. None of the planes recorded that morning made it home. Today, if you visit the American Military Cemetery at Cambridge, you can find a marker for Jimmy Sullivan and his crew. It's one of thousands, white crosses in perfect rows, each one representing a story like Jimmy's. A letter home, a life cut short, a family that learned to live with absence. But if you know where to look, if you go at the right time of day when the sun is setting and the light is golden, you can see something else. Someone has been leaving flowers on Jimmy's marker for decades. Fresh flowers, every week, with a simple card that says, "Remembered alive." The flowers are from Margaret, the girl from the village tea shop, the one Jimmy was going to ask to the dance. She never married, never forgot the quiet American boy who was kind to everyone, who remembered names and asked about families, who was going to ask her to dance but ran out of time. She tends his memory the way she tends her garden, with patience and love and the understanding that some things, once planted in the heart, never stop growing. In the archives of the 389th Bombardment Group, there's a mission report from March 19, 1944. It lists Ohio dreams as failed to return, a bureaucratic euphemism for 10 deaths. But someone, probably the squadron commander, added a handwritten note at the bottom. "Good crew, best ball turret gunner we had. They fought all the way down." That's how they remembered Jimmy Sullivan officially, as a good gunner who fought to the end. But his letter tells us who he really was. A scared boy who did his duty anyway. A son who loved his parents. A brother who worried about Bobby. A young man who noticed kindness in the middle of war and wanted to dance with a girl named Margaret. He was all of these things and he was afraid and he went anyway. The last line of his letter, the one that haunts everyone who reads it, wasn't about heroism or sacrifice or the necessity of war. It was simpler and more profound than that. "Remember me alive." 3 words that contain everything: plea, command, hope, love. The entire weight of a life that ended too soon but refused to be forgotten. Remember them alive. All of them. The bomber crews and the fighter pilots, the ones who came home changed and the ones who never came home at all. Remember them not as statistics or casualties or names on monuments, but as they were young and afraid and brave and human, writing letters home on rainy English nights, carrying pictures over their hearts, playing harmonicas in the darkness, making plans for dances they would never attend. Remember them alive because that's all they asked for. That's all any of us ask for in the end. To be remembered not for how we died, but for how we lived, how we loved, how we faced the impossible with nothing but youth and hope and letters home that said what we couldn't say in person. Jimmy Sullivan died on March 19, 1944, at the age of 22. But in his letter, in these words that survived when he didn't, he lives forever, forever young, forever hopeful, forever writing home to say he's scared but going anyway, forever asking to be remembered alive. And we do remember. We must remember. We cannot afford to forget.